You are standing in the thin gold light of a Yorkshire morning, boots wet with river mist, lungs raw from marching, when the shape ahead finally stops being landscape and becomes men. Men without enough armor, men dragged away from their ships. Men who crossed the North Sea to take a kingdom and now have a river at their back, a bridge at their throat, and a king who arrived too early for them to believe he could be here at all. You hear no speech worth remembering, only iron, feet in mud, orders swallowed by wind. Somewhere ahead, a road narrows into killing space. Somewhere beyond it, banners shift, then vanish behind shield rims. Before this day ends, Harald Hardrada, one of the hardest war leaders in the 11th century, will be dead. Tostig Godwinson will be dead. The Norwegian bid for England will be broken, and the army doing the breaking will already be marching toward its own ruin. Because this field is not the end of 1066, it is the wound that makes the rest of the year bleed. Historic England English Heritage Britannica. Before we step onto the bridge at Stamford, War Scriptures asks one thing. If this kind of history, documented, unsanitized, and precise, matters to you, subscribe. It keeps the archive work alive, now back to Yorkshire. Most people remember 1066 as a straight road to Hastings. That memory is convenient, but it is false. The year was not one invasion, it was a chain reaction. Edward the Confessor died on 5 January without a direct heir. Harald Godwinson took the crown the next day. William of Normandy disputed it. Harald Hardrada disputed it. And Tostig, Harold's own brother, helped turn a foreign invasion into an English civil fracture. This isn't a clean duel of kings. This is a succession crisis with salt water in it. English Heritage Britannica, Harald II Britannica, Battle of Stamford Bridge. That matters because Stamford Bridge is often reduced to legend, the lone axeman, the blazing speed of Harold's march, the last Viking falling in theatrical fashion. But the historical reality is harder and more useful. Hardrada was not a raider in the old cartoon sense. He was a reigning king of Norway with long military experience, a record stretching through Scandinavia and the Byzantine world, and a real, if weak by English standards, claim born out of earlier Scandinavian dynastic politics. Tostig was not a stock traitor floating free of context. He was an exiled earl, driven out of Northumbria in 1065, carrying grievance, ambition, and family hatred into alliance with a foreign king. University of Edinburgh Britannica, Harald III Britannica, Tostig, and the phrase "the day Vikings lost forever needs discipline." The most widely accepted interpretation is that Stamford Bridge symbolically ends the Viking Age in England. But historians like Alex Wolff warn that 793 to 1066 is an English way of periodizing a much larger Scandinavian world. This isn't the end of all Scandinavian power. This is the destruction of the last major Scandinavian attempt to conquer England by force. That is dramatic enough without lying. Cambridge Core Yale History Britannica, Norman Conquest. The road to Stamford Bridge began before 1066. England and Scandinavia had been entangled for generations, through raids, settlements, tribute, dynastic claims, and kings like Knut, who ruled a North Sea empire. Harold inherited a kingdom that sat at the edge of that old political weather system. Hardrada entered 1066 as the heir to a martial tradition that still imagined England as part of the Scandinavian power game. The University of Edinburgh's Hardrada project is right to call his death a prelude to the Norman conquest and the end of that North Sea imperial pattern. University of Edinburgh Britannica, Norman conquest. Tostig's role made the danger immediate. As Earl of Northumbria, he had ruled harshly enough that revolt drove him out in 1065. Harold accepted the rebels' demands and let Morcar replace him. That decision may have been politically necessary. It was also familial poison. Tostig spent 1066 looking for leverage: Flanders, Normandy, Scotland, then Norway. By the time he joined Hardrada, this was not just a foreign invasion. It was a revenge campaign stapled onto an international succession war. Britannica, Tostig Britannica, Harald II, Hardrada struck first in the north. He and Tostig came with a fleet usually given as around 250 to 300 ships. Numbers for fighting men vary sharply, and sources disagree on whether the army was closer to 5,000 or much larger. What is secure is the sequence. The invaders sailed up the Humber and Ouse, defeated the northern earls Edwin and Morcar at Fulford on 20th of September and forced York into submission. Once York bent, the road inland opened. English Heritage Britannica, Battle of Stamford Bridge Britannica, Tostig. Geography now mattered as much as bloodline. Stamford Bridge lay east of York on the River Derwent, in a shallow valley with crossings that historians still argue about. Historic England notes that the exact location of the 1066 bridge is uncertain, and even the deployment ground is reconstructed only in broad terms. What seems likely is that the main action took place around higher ground near what later tradition calls Battle Flat, where even a slight crest could help a force trying to form under pressure. Small rises matter when lines are made of men with shields. Historic England listing. Harold's answer was speed. Here the sources diverge in the counting. English Heritage emphasizes roughly 185 miles in 4 days. Historic England describes a march from London in barely 6 days. Britannica counts from departure on the 16th of September to battle on the 25th of September, which gives 9 days including movement, mustering, and approach. These are not really contradictions so much as different clocks started at different points. What all sources agree on is that Harold moved north with extraordinary urgency, gathering troops as he went, and reached his enemies before they expected him. English Heritage Historic England listing Britannica, Harold II. That speed was the first decisive weapon of the battle, not the axe. Not the spear, time. Hardrada had won at Fulford and seems to have believed he had operational breathing room. Later tradition says the Norwegians came to Stamford Bridge to receive hostages and that many had left their mail on the ships because the day was warm. Contemporary evidence is thinner than the legend, but the broad point is accepted by several standard accounts. Harold arrived before the Norwegian force was fully prepared for the kind of battle it was about to fight. English Heritage Britannica, Battle of Stamford Bridge, Historic England. The second decisive factor was the crossing itself. If an army is forced through a narrow bridge or ford, it cannot bring its numbers to bear all at once. The battle begins as traffic management under weapons. This isn't heroism as a painting likes it, this is queue control with bodies. Later English tradition tells of a single giant Norwegian holding the bridge until killed from below. Historic England warns that this story may be a late embellishment. The Norse sagas do not emphasize it the same way. But even if the story grew in the retelling, the bottleneck was real. Harold had to force a crossing before he could use surprise properly. Historic England battlefields trust Scandinavian studies. Once that barrier failed, the fight opened. The Norwegians had enough discipline to form and resist. Hardrada was not leading rabble. He had commanded men for decades and had fought in several military cultures. Even sources cautious about saga detail accept the basic picture of hard resistance after initial surprise. This is important. Stamford Bridge was not won because the English found cowards. It was won because surprise bought Harold time, and Harold turned that time into pressure before the enemy could fully recover. University of Edinburgh Scandinavian Studies Historic England listing. The third turning point was the death of Hardrada. Standard modern summaries repeat the tradition that he was killed by an arrow in the throat. That detail appears in later narrative tradition and is widely cited, but the exact mechanism of death should still be handled carefully. What is secure is that Hardrada died in the battle's critical phase, and once a king dies in a shield wall fight, command becomes a survival problem. A line can absorb casualties. It does not easily absorb the sudden removal of the man everyone is facing around. Britannica, Battle of Stamford Bridge, English Heritage, Scandinavian Studies. Tostig did not salvage it. Later sources preserve an offer of peace from Harold to his brother and a refusal. The exact words belong to tradition more than courtroom proof, but the political truth underneath them is plausible enough. At some point, after Hardrada fell, the battle became less about winning England than about whether Tostig would submit, flee, or die beside the alliance he had made. He chose death. That gave the Norwegians stubbornness, not rescue. Britannica, Battle of Stamford Bridge, Battlefields Trust, Scandinavian Studies. The fourth turning point came from recall, where part of the Norwegian force and much of its equipment remained near the ships. Reinforcements did arrive. That matters because it means the battle was not simply a one-sided slaughter from first contact. There was a moment when fresh Norwegians entered a fight against English troops already strained by the assault. Some accounts suggest this phase was fierce enough to threaten the exhausted victors. But fresh is relative. Men running into a battle late do not arrive as perfect instruments. They arrive blown, fragmented, and forced into chaos on someone else's clock. Battlefields trust Historic England listing English heritage. Records from this period are incomplete, but the human cost is not hard to imagine because logistics leaves marks even when chroniclers do not. Armies of this size moved through harvest country in late September. They ate because civilians fed them or lost food to them. They marched because local people knew roads, fords, mills, and store points. York had already seen Fulford. The countryside east of the city then watched a second army arrive and a second battle form in less than a week. Chroniclers mostly count kings. The poor counted missing sons, emptied barns, and fields cut by men who would not reap them. Britannica Wiley Online Library, British Library, prisoners, wounded men, and fugitives made the battlefield worse after the killing stopped. The pursuit back toward the fleet meant more deaths beyond the main clash. English casualty figures are frustratingly unclear. Norwegian losses were catastrophic, but even their precision is illusion. The famous figure that only 24 ships were needed to carry the survivors home has survived because it captures scale, not because it gives a modern audited body count. Estimates range from several thousand dead to even higher reconstructions built from fleet assumptions. The honest answer is that the invaders were shattered, and the exact arithmetic remains disputed. English Heritage Britannica, Battle of Stamford Bridge, Historic England, and still the battle did not become clean in memory. Viking violence has long been exaggerated in some traditions and romanticized in others. Medieval churchmen could turn Scandinavians into divine punishment. Modern audiences can turn them into rugged anti-heroes. Neither habit helps here. Hardrada was capable, ambitious, and dangerous. Harald was fast, disciplined, and lethal. Tostig was both politically intelligible and catastrophically destructive. No one on this field needs modern absolution to matter. Wiley Online Library, Yale History. The decisive military lesson of Stamford Bridge is that Harald won by compressing the enemy's decision time. He hit before Hardrada could integrate victory at Fulford into stable control over Yorkshire. He forced combat at a crossing. He exploited incomplete Norwegian readiness. He kept enough cohesion to survive the arrival of reinforcements. This isn't fatigue as an excuse. This is tempo as a weapon. Historic England listing battlefields trust Britannica. Harald II to terrain helped because terrain always helps someone. The Derwent narrowed choice. A bridge or ford concentrates movement. Slightly raised ground can steady defenders who are scrambling to form. Open cultivated land gives fewer places to hide disorder. Historic England also notes that later urban growth obscures parts of the site, so any exact map of every phase should be treated modestly. But the broad operational picture is solid. The Norwegians were caught in a bad spatial arrangement, and Harald was good enough to make it fatal. Historic England listing. There is also a brutal irony in the equipment question. If later sources are right that many Norwegians had left their mail behind, then the difference between kingship and catastrophe at Stamford Bridge was measured partly in metal not being where it needed to be. If those accounts overstate the matter, the larger truth survives anyway. Readiness is physical. It is where the armor is, where the ships are, how far the reinforcements are, how quickly an army can go from marching to ordered killing. English Heritage Scandinavian Studies Historic England. Then the climax. The crossing broke. The English got through. The Norwegian line held long enough to become a real battle. Hardrada fell. Tostig stayed. Reinforcements came in hard and late. The English, already exhausted, did not collapse first. That last point matters most. Battles like this are often decided less by the first shock than by which side stops acting like an army sooner. On 25 September 10,066, that side was the Norwegian one. Historic England listing Britannica. Battle of Stamford Bridge. Shortly after, discipline turned into slaughter. Once a line fragments near a river crossing and a road to ships, retreat ceases to be orderly movement and becomes sorting by speed, luck, and location. Men die because they are trapped by terrain. Men die because they cannot hear orders. Men die because the side pursuing them still has formation. The pursuit toward Rickle was part of the destruction, not a footnote to it. Battlefields trust English heritage. By evening, the Norwegian expedition had lost its king, lost Tostig, lost its claim to immediate victory, and lost the mass needed to continue the campaign. The field belonged to Harald. So did the operational initiative, so did the story briefly. This isn't a triumphant ending. This is a tactical masterpiece that buys almost no strategic peace. Historic England listing British Library. The aftermath was savage in numbers and sharp in timing. The standard tradition says only 24 ships were needed to take the Norwegian survivors home out of an original fleet of roughly 250 to 300. Whether that figure is exact or rhetorical, it signals devastation on a scale no victorious chronicler needed to exaggerate much. Harald reportedly granted terms to Olaf, Hardrada's son, and allowed the remnants to depart. That gesture was practical as much as merciful. The threat in the north had to end immediately, because another one was already gathering in the south. English heritage battlefields trust Britannica. Battle of Stamford Bridge. 3 days later, on 28th of September, William landed. That is the fact that turns Stamford Bridge from victory into trap. Harald had done exactly what a competent king had to do: move fast, strike hard, destroy the northern invader. But the win cost time, energy, and manpower, and it pulled England's main royal field army far from the Channel coast. Sources differ on how decisive Stamford Bridge fatigue was at Hastings, and historians still debate whether exhaustion, attrition, or broader strategic circumstance mattered most. But no serious account denies the sequence. Harold won in Yorkshire, and then had to race south into another war. English Heritage Britannica, Harold II, British Library. The legacy is why Stamford Bridge deserves more than cameo status. In one sense, yes, it severed the old political pull between England and Scandinavia. English heritage and Britannica are right to say 1066 redirected England toward the continent, especially after the Norman conquest replaced the English aristocracy with a Norman one and tied power more tightly to France-facing politics. In that sense, Hardrada's defeat was not just a battle loss. It was the collapse of one possible future for England. English heritage Britannica, Norman conquest. But legacy needs precision too. Sources disagree on whether we should call this the day the Vikings ended, because the Vikings is itself a modern overreach when used as if it describes one fixed people across every Scandinavian society and century. The safer formulation is this: Stamford Bridge was the last great Scandinavian invasion of England led by a reigning Norwegian king, and its failure removed the northern claimant just before a Norman claimant succeeded. It did not erase Scandinavia, it changed England. Cambridge Core, Yale History Britannica, Norman Conquest. That's Stamford Bridge. No legend can soften it. If you stayed to the end, War Scriptures thanks you. Leave your take on Harold's gamble or suggest the next forgotten conflict, and the hard question is not whether Harold was brave. He was. It is whether a king should be judged by the battle he wins or by the kingdom he fails to keep. On 25th of September 1066, Harald Godwinson did almost everything right in tactical terms. He moved faster than his enemies thought possible. He chose his moment. He broke a dangerous invasion. Yet within weeks he was dead, and England had changed hands. So what do we call Stamford Bridge? A masterpiece? A necessity? A fatal overextension? Maybe all three. Because history is cruel that way. Sometimes the correct decision still opens the door to disaster. Sometimes a king saves his country from one future only to deliver it, bleeding and breathless, into another.